World of Warcraft Legion has just completed the first big leg in its delivery of content. You're here because you might be looking for someone to share their thoughts on this expansion. Or you're not playing WoW currently, and you're wondering if now is a good time to jump in. Hey, it's Soul, and I'm going to give you an almost review of World of Warcraft Legion. But reviews of an MMO are hard, aren't they? The Legion experience will be very different if you played it since its launch, or if you just jumped in during the last month or two. And it really gets complicated when it comes to different people's playstyles. On top of that, it's difficult to give a review when MMOs change constantly. Legion has its core components in place, but a lot's changed since its announcement a few years ago, up to where we are as of March. So throughout this video, I'll hope to answer two questions. Has Legion been a good expansion up to this point? And is Legion worth picking up now? The World of Warcraft has carried the boon and burden of being the #1 MMO for years, defining an MMO generation and maybe even holding it back from innovating. With every expansion, it's been pressured to change things up, to stick to its roots, to revolutionize and innovate, or refine and polish, or just give up and release legacy realms. For every review you'll see of this game, including this one, you'll find no less than 50 fans who disagree. The World of Warcraft over its 12+ year history is a perfect flaw. It's an anomaly of a success, a perfect storm of design, timing, and luck. But when you break WoW down into a sum of its parts, you see the details, the cracks in the armor, the flaws that both mar and define it as a game. But so many will compare its iterations based on its expansions. Legion follows in the footsteps of Warlords of Draenor, an expansion that, in so few words, was a weak delivery. In a way, you'd want to think that after an expansion like Warlords, which is often argued specifically as having too little to do except raid and diddle around in front of a table, Legion has got to be a better expansion, right? The answer is yes, but it's not because Warlords set the bar so low. Granted, by comparing the first few months of Legion against the first few months of Warlords, we can say that Legion has delivered more raids, dungeons, world bosses, organic content platforms, and available activities to do on a daily basis. If we look at Legion as a vessel of potential, it certainly has it. We'll soon have the Tomb of Sargeras and Argus to look forward to, while Warlord's last major delivery of content came in the form of Tanan Jungle and Hellfire Citadel, which in my opinion was still a good raid, but with regards to premier content delivery, that was about it. But let's move away from the comparisons, otherwise we'd be here all day. Legion ought to be measured on its own merits and not compared to an expansion that's demonstrably worse. Nor should it be compared to any other expansions, or even classic WoW. Legion brings players a delivery of content and progression paths that's borderline overwhelming in its ambition. More than any expansion, Legion has empowered players with choice, which has so far proven to be a double-edged sword. It's liberating for some, but a door to endless gameplay for others. So let's start with the featured content. The Demon Hunter has been a long-awaited class to be finally introduced in World of Warcraft Legion. It was more than an obvious choice to bring in the glaive-wielding, demon-slaying edgelord. As the third class to be added since WoW's launch and the second, quote, hero class, it was predictably met with mixed reactions despite the fanfare, nostalgia, and the inclusion of its godfather, Illidan Stormrage, making his return. Some players were unhappy that this iconic class only included a melee and a tank specialization, making this the first time a class only had two to choose from. Blizzard came back to state that despite their efforts, they couldn't come up with an effective third spec, be it another melee, a ranged, or even a healer, that fit the class's theme and fantasy. Nonetheless, the Demon Hunter is here, and is reasonably well represented among the raiding community, including the reigning world first guild, Exorcists. Looking away at the representation at the higher skill band though, the Demon Hunter is just fun to play. It somehow has its own unique feel thanks to the usage of sigils and demonic abilities. Even what I just thought was a gimmicky gliding skill proved to be a part of the Demon Hunter's iconic look and feel. Next we have artifact weapons. Every class and spec is given its own unique, named weapon to complement its role in Legion, naturally to either directly or indirectly beat up bad guys, who we know as the Burning Legion. This is one part of a paradigm Blizzard calls class fantasy, which may or may not have obtained a meme-like status, but this was a partial answer to players' outcry for more class or spec-specific quests that were around in previous expansions. Artifact weapons serve as both an instrument of pain as well as a content delivery system. It's essentially a weapon that gains experience well beyond the character's maximum level, which clocks out at 110 in Legion. It comes with its own questline to develop and later upgrade. To supplement the boredom of otherwise only having one weapon or dozens of Ashbringers flailing around, Numerous skin unlocks have been made available since Legion's launch, with more to come in future patches. The artifact weapons themselves encompass the history of Warcraft itself, partially embedded thanks to its games and books, but most of the weapons have a story created specific to its deployment in this expansion. Weapons like the Ashbringer and the Doomhammer are easy to identify, but what's Ebon Chill, if not a kind of iced latte? Bad joke, thank you very much. Each of the few dozen weapons available to all the game's classes and specs were given its own backstory or additional story to back up existing lore. As a consequence, some weapons do feel more epic than others, but personally I applaud the effort, if not the result. Artifacts gain experience through artifact power, a progression currency that's obtained through various activities and strengthens the weapon as well as the character's stats throughout the expansion's lifetime. It's been marred though by the player's sentiment around the social pressure or the need to power up the weapon as quickly as possible, even though there have been systems introduced since Legion's launch known as Artifact Knowledge to help speed up this process along for latecomers, alts, or for players who just want to enjoy the game casually. The features of the artifacts and its progression defines a system that frees players from feeling forced to meet a daily or a weekly cap of activity, and instead farm to grind to their content. On the flip side, we could also look at the system as a long race to the finish, a challenge to players' self-control, and maybe a test against human limitations. I've reviewed this system exhaustively over the months, and have decided that this is an attempt by Blizzard to do a lot less hand-holding when it comes to a player's personal progression, and as usual conduct their own study to see how a system like this plays out. It's my opinion that the system may be an evolution of more dated progression systems, but in one way it threatens to draw a line between vague labels like casual and hardcore. Players just coming into Legion will have a speedier experience when it comes to powering up their weapon thanks to a few mechanisms, so you can get closer to the action as soon as you hit level 110. This has been Blizzard's thing for a while now, to not want to punish players who happen to join in during an expansion's lifecycle as opposed to the very start. Each day, more and more players are obtaining the current maximum ranks for one or more of their weapons, much like how a player runs out of options to spend Valor points on. Future content hopes to further enhance the overall longevity of the system with more milestones to hit, skins to unlock, and ways to catch up. The reaction to the eventual shifting of the goalpost has been mixed among players though. Those who think of progressing through their artifact weapons as a race to complete see this as an endless grind. On the other hand, those who play under the premise that they will always be a little bit stronger at the end of a play session see this as a much more passive, automatic system. It's been stated by Blizzard that this feature isn't likely to advance to future expansions, but the question remains as to what, if any, components of the system will. Personally, I'm skeptical about holding on to such an iconic weapon, but I really dig the idea of having a weapon that we build up over a long period of time, as opposed to replacing it as soon as we kill the next boss on our best in slot list. It brings back the feeling of role-playing again, and I hope I get to see myself creating and powering up a weapon or item entirely of my choosing. Legendary gear is not new to WoW. They've come in various forms of delivery and inclusiveness. In the most previous expansion, they were more of a companion item. It came in the form of a single ring that advanced over the course of the expansion story. In Legion, there are dozens of legendaries available, but only obtainable through chance and not a predefined event or quest. Legendaries are, at the moment, the most visible centerpiece of dissatisfaction among players who don't like this or any system that limits control of their own destiny. It's nothing new. Results from a random number generator or RNG have been around the block for a while now, but having zero control over the drop rate of a highly coveted item is a thorn on the side of players under the influence that gear equals power equals success. This might not be the majority mindset of WoW players, but it's certainly a reasonable argument that has warranted a response from Blizzard, even if they're small steps that come in the form of craftable and targeted legendaries in a future patch. The current director of the World of Warcraft has admitted that legendaries are a flawed system due to the items themselves and not so much its drop rate. Some legendaries provide utility while others provide a significant damage boost. This has led to the obvious perception that obtaining a DPS legendary is good and everything else is bad. Couple that with an uncontrollable chance of item dropping and you have a recipe of social toxicity between haves and have-nots. Blizzard is making efforts to blur the differences between these DPS and utility legendaries in a number of ways. Personally, I think that for new and casual players, legendaries are a neat bonus to enjoy whenever they drop, and if they don't, it's nothing to really sweat over. Let's move on to where Legion will take players, to the Broken Isles themselves. With little doubt, more effort and detail has been put into building the Broken Isles than in any previous continent introduced in WoW. Each turn you take can lead you somewhere, and rewards you with a rare encounter, a treasure chest, or a mini-event. Nooks and crannies are peppered throughout the zones that help players cut through the beaten path, even if flight won't be available until after completing a lengthy series of objectives in an upcoming patch. Thankfully, there's an item that helps you get around at endgame too. New lighting and graphics effects have also brought about more vivid colors and maybe more importantly, darker nights. Another strong delivery of voiceovers helps shape the day-to-day experience, although some voices are more enjoyable than others, and even the biggest fans can handle harpies for so long. Legion's strongest and most immersive delivery comes in the form of the full-on city that was created in the Suramar zone, complete with a zoo, a winery, and a lot of guards. It's easily one of my favorite World of Warcraft zones of all time. But a plus and minus regarding the Broken Isles as a whole lie with its density. The zones thrive with activity thanks to daily activities and their relatively close proximity to one another, but somehow Legion continues a direction by Blizzard to shorten the physical gaps between points A, B, and C. This is just speculation, but I feel like it's related to the ever-constant debate on flight, which won't be accessible until patch 7.2, and the design of traveling between objectives. The world of Legion feels almost too dense. In any story, there's an origin, a journey, and a destination. It's been argued that flying compromises the journey, but I question whether or not the high density of the Broken Isles has also helped to compromise the experience. Meanwhile, dungeons and raids continue to push the boundaries of WoW's engine with contrast of themes. From the depths of Helheim to the halls of Valor, from the Nightmare to the Night Hold, you see a lot of thought and care went towards building this world. Legion continues a tradition of taking several dungeons and inserting them into the game world to really bring the world to scale, and I find that really cool. Instances like the Eye of Ashara, Court of Stars, and even the Trial of Valor and Nighthold raids, they're viewable out in the open world and used for their own quests and other activities. Of course, there's no game without an adequate story, and Blizzard went far, perhaps too far, with trying to deliver a story that paints the urgency of a Legion invasion. Heroes fell, and Legion starts off with a desperate search for items called the Pillars of Creation that'll stop the Legion's invasion and their efforts at destroying the world. Meanwhile, we're sidetracked by the looming Nightmare, an incursion from Hell, a Naga invasion, and of course the Horde and Alliance conflict. It's pretty loaded. For players like me who enjoy a decent story, I can say it's a decent story considering what there is to work with. Every class and spec has a story to work with thanks to class orders, which is basically a club for each of the 12 classes, complete with their own quest lines and characters who all decided that since the Alliance and Horde can't stop killing each other, class orders will take up the reins of defending the world, and we players get to be the leaders of our order. Nice promotion, even if I didn't want it. With our class orders come order halls, a special little clubhouse for our special little club. Every class gets a uniquely themed instance zone, with very different levels of scale and spectacle. Sure, a lodge in the mountains and a hidden society under Dalaran is cool, a giant church under a much smaller one is a bit tough to swallow. But there are order halls in space too, be it a spaceship, an interstellar temple, or another frickin' planet. Even professions have a questline and narrative built around them to deliver a more meaningful experience than to simply learn skills from a trainer, but I've got to admit from an alt standpoint, this can be kind of a pain in the ass. The environment, story, and questing experience is wrapped with a scaling system that applies to each of the Broken Isle zones and dungeons with a few exceptions. In a nutshell, creatures will always match the player's level regardless of what zone they travel to, and players will encounter creatures the same way even if their levels are different. Despite the technical complications behind the level scaling system, it's created a natural experience for players who all experience the world similarly, whether they just landed on the Broken Isles or if they're at max level, and it feels pretty darn cool. In a way, you can think of the story and questing experience to be like an open world game that allows the freedom to go almost wherever you want and not worry too much about your current level. The success of this system has started numerous conversations among players, asking for this to apply to the rest of WoW's previous content in order to breathe renewed life into these old zones. Another part of the success comes from the fact that leveling doesn't take very long at all, and in fact it doesn't matter thanks to the scaling. Levels are just a brief prerequisite to accessing more story and gameplay that would otherwise feel disjointed if you were to, say, jump into raids and high-level dungeons from the get-go. Other features made their way into Legion, including more pets to capture and tame, and the return of the Brawlers Guild. Players now have a wardrobe interface that saves your earned cosmetic gear, and with the WoW token system, not only can players purchase game time with gold, they can resell that game time for Battle.net balance. Professions have had different individual impacts in Legion. As stated earlier, building them up involves a series of quests that will take players to different zones and even instances. It's a nice and immersive approach, but as an endgame system, I feel like it falls flat. Professions are supported by a rank system that improves your ability to efficiently gather or craft, and especially for gathering, a lot of luck is needed in order to rank up and receive bonus resources for whatever they harvest, which in my opinion is okay. Cooking, on the other hand, didn't receive the same treatment, subjecting players to rely on pure chance to learn more efficient recipes by depositing resources into what I consider a panda-shaped black hole. Armor crafting professions, in my opinion, got a significant nerf to their ability to make decent gear. Previously, players were restricted to either craft or wear a set amount of crafted gear in order to not trivialize other paths to gearing. Legion's crafting allows players to wear any number of crafted gear and upgrade it with a special forge. But this comes with a fatal drawback. Its maximum potential appears to be pretty trivial compared to what's possible at endgame. In short, armor professions in comparison to consumable professions and gathering fall far short of my expectations. But let's jump to the endgame, shall we? Starting with PvP, a massive overhaul was done with the gearing system in that it was outright removed. In its place are stat templates that activate when in instance PvP like arenas, and the only external influence comes from whether or not you have a high item level. Even then, this doesn't make a huge difference. Also replacing it is a prestige-like system that rewards players with titles and other cosmetic accolades once enough honor has been earned. This has done strange things, most notably to water down the feeling of obtaining powerful gear designed strictly for PvP combat. On top of that, obtaining this gear has so far been entirely by chance, in the form of strongboxes and other mostly random elements. Many players haven't responded well to this approach due to the unreliability of the gearing system and, as a consequence, an unreliable feeling of accomplishment. Changes will come in a future patch, allowing players to take unwanted gear and basically trade them in for something more desired. Meanwhile, while brand new battlegrounds weren't released or announced for launch, remixes of previous battlegrounds will launch in the near future. Most players at max level will participate in a system known as World Quests, an ever-rotating selection of hundreds of quests based on the adventures players took part within each zone. This is one of a few new content platforms in Legion that deliver a continuous nag of there being something to do, as World Quests will appear every few hours as opposed to each day. World Quests share similarities to quests previously completed while leveling, but include new activities including basic kill and collect quests, and PvP objectives, as well as non-combat world quests like completing profession work orders, collecting resources, and cheating at a shell game. To not overwhelm players, world quests are sorted into requests by emissaries that appear each day, asking players to complete a number of world quests related to their needs. Doing this earns a snazzy reward, but of course players can complete world quests to their heart's content. I think this is a brilliant, if incomplete, system that takes advantage of the entirety of the Broken Isle zones, as opposed to earlier expansions that use a significantly smaller piece of real estate for repeatable content. A rotating system of rewards ensures that collecting nuts and squirrels won't always give you the exact same reward, offering players opportunities to complete different quests for the rewards they want. Legion brings players a wide array of dungeons with a lot of fun and varied encounters. From a haunted stronghold to a deep underground cave to basically Asgard, Legion's dungeons help to once again serve as a capstone to the questing experience in each of its zones. Dungeons have always played a part in WoW's endgame, but until now it only felt relevant up to a certain point. Legion brings us Mythic Keystones, a special modifier that turns a Legion dungeon into a timed challenge mode, and with awesome loot to go with it. Imagine a dungeon where bosses hit twice as hard and apply a healing debuff with every attack, while the party has to constantly watch the ground for volcanic explosions. And this is on top of the boss's normal abilities. This is another content platform that builds the premise that for players not interested in the sometimes unforgiving requirements of raiding, completing high-level Mythic Keystone dungeons is a reasonable alternative that balances challenge and variety with fewer logistical hurdles. Of Legion's content platforms, this one is definitely my favorite. It's kept dungeons relevant after having gone through expansion after expansion of farming trivial heroics time and time again for little to no gain. Like so many things in Legion, Keystone dungeons offer a choice to push player skill, challenge players' ambitions to quickly farm, or both. In a very welcome addition that hasn't come since World of Warcraft Cataclysm, new dungeons have been introduced during the course of the expansion. Karazhan, an old favorite raid from the Burning Crusade days, returns in the form of a dungeon. Meanwhile, a new Legion-themed dungeon will make its way to live servers in an upcoming patch. In the past, I was less thrilled with dungeons being introduced mid-expansion because of the short shelf life dungeons used to have, but thanks to Keystones and Time Walking, these dungeons will continue to be a worthwhile investment. Except for Violet Hold. Poor Violet Hold. Of course, what's an expansion without some solid raid content? Following a generally positive streak of solid raids that came since the start of the Mists of Pandaria expansion, Legion brings a strong delivery of higher end PvE that, while it wasn't without its hiccups and balance missteps, has been a generally gratifying experience. Players tackled the Emerald Nightmare, endured the Trials of Valor, and purged the Nighthold of Legion influence. The top-end band of raiding pushed the boundaries of Blizzard's raid design as usual, exposing a tuning flaw at the end of the Emerald Nightmare and the Trial of Valor, Legion's first two raids. The Nighthold raid was very well received by the raiding elite without significant hiccups, and is a satisfying conclusion that will take players to the next chapter in the defense of Azeroth. All of this PvE content, the raids and the dungeons and the world quests and all of its variations make for a lot of options for WoW's diverse player base. At endgame, there is a lot a player can do in a single day. All of this came after Blizzard sat down with themselves and pointed out the obvious based on their previous experiences. Eventually, as players progress into higher content, they say goodbye to the activities that were no longer worth the rewards that came from them, no matter how easy they became thanks to obtaining better gear. In other words, older content had to make way for new content, and this older content was largely forgotten while in the same expansion. Blizzard had a goal to challenge that process and try to make all their activities relevant. The hardest content in the game still give out the best and most prestigious rewards, but endgame activities should always have a value on them, even when it's pretty transparent that farming easy content shouldn't get you the best gear at the same rate. Mythic Keystones did the job for dungeons with its widespread of options, but what about everything else? Blizzard made the decision to implement a random bonus attribute called Titanforging, which is probably going to be looked back on as a controversial feature for players, but probably a necessary system or at least a first step to achieve Blizzard's goals. Titanforging is an item level bonus that can occur as soon as you kill a boss, open an emissary chest, or otherwise receive loot. Unlike Warforging, which is a smaller item level bonus that also exists in Legion, Titanforging is a very large bonus. In short, drops have a small chance to turning what's otherwise a normal dungeon or a world quest drop into a maximum Titanforged piece of gear on par with hard-earned loot from Mythic raids. It sounds crazy, and in practice it has been, with stories going around about players fetching gear that would otherwise have no business dropping from a regular dungeon. This is on top of the possibility of legendary gear dropping. In defense of this approach, I'll once again bring up Blizzard's desire to keep activities relevant. When you take an activity like, say, completing a round of world quests, and you add in awesome things like a chance at Titanforge and legendary drops, and add in again a constant source of progression that comes with artifact power, you now have an activity that's always relevant. Blizzard wanted to give players a reason to do whatever they want and come away from it feeling just a little bit more progressed as they did before. There's nothing wrong with that until we step back and look at the many different levels of dedication that exist between players. Grinding and RNG are the trigger words of this expansion and represent many of the negative feelings from players regarding this type of reward system. It's easy to sympathize with the feeling that gearing could feel endless because even if something nice dropped, maybe it could have been better. Maybe a legendary could be lurking around the next corner, so you might want to farm that 1 or 2 or 7 more dungeons. But that feeling is pretty darn subjective and doesn't apply to every player of WoW in the same way. In the context of a review though, it's more fair to me to admit that yeah, Blizzard's definitely opened themselves up to criticism by making a system that effectively denies fulfillment. But until Legion, WoW's endgame system has mostly summed up to raid or die, thanks to the hard caps on rewards below raiding, and alternative systems like crafting and valor points didn't do much to make activities like dungeons very attractive. Preventing activities from becoming totally irrelevant is a step in the right direction. But giving the chance for some of the best gear to drop from trivial activities, even a small one, feels misleading. Blizzard hoped that the system could bring back some of those feelings of awesome moments, but instead, the system backfired, creating a warped sense of expectation that snowballed into a gambler's obsession for some players. As said, this system of chance threatened to define Legion. In my opinion though, it fortunately has not. The last part of this review isn't directly on the game but the people behind it. Blizzard's developers and community managers have been more outspoken than they have ever been with a stream of live Q&As, posts, tweets, and blogs, though I can't say with confidence that it's been a consistent stream. Like any game with millions of players invested into a few dozen different classes and specs, playstyles, and attitudes, and I guess there are only a few of those, Blizzard continues to struggle to reach out to these players who feel like they're forgotten in their own microcosm. A lack of robust patch notes, responses to specific concerns, and misunderstandings mean a lot for public perception, even if the large majority of players don't pay attention to such things. As someone who's kept track of ongoing news constantly, I can get behind that sentiment, but I stand by my earlier statement. They're talking to players more than ever, it's just that they might be saying things or making changes players don't like. And it's hard to say whether it's because they're not listening or are cognizant that these complaints from players don't speak for the majority. So ultimately, how's Legion? Legion makes WoW the best it's been in years. It brings technological advances that fans have been yearning for. It's a spectacle on a scale of detail that previous expansions ought to be jealous of. It's daring, as all expansions have been, bringing systems to keep the game fresh while trying to keep its identity after over 12 years. It does set on a bed of controversy with its randomness, but it's not enough to convince players to not give it a try. Maybe the pendulum swung too far this time, but personally, I like having plenty of options available to me. And it's been only 6 months. We're not done yet. Should you play Legion, or at least give it a try? Absolutely. Legion has fully embraced the idea of letting new players get closer to the action. Pick up a box, boost a new or existing character to 100, and get started on the Broken Isles right away. Systems that help you catch up to your friends faster are there in artifact knowledge, world quests, and more ways to catch up will come soon. And it's fun. Fight the Legion, have an adventure, make some friends. Thanks for watching, and stay breezy.